Alex Harris had been an avid gamer since he was a child. He would spend countless hours playing and analyzing many different games during his childhood, and over time he developed a particular interest in testing games and providing feedback to the developers. As he got older, he realized that his passion for gaming could be turned into a career, and so when he graduated high school, he applied for every game-related job he could find. After a few interviews and rejections, Alex finally landed a job as a game tester in the fall of 2010 for a new gaming workplace that just opened near his hometown in Ontario, Canada. He was over the moon about it, and when he arrived at the building on his first day, he was given a warm welcome out by the people in charge. They gave him a tour of the workplace, told him the rules, and introduced him to the other colleagues who were also working there. After Alex had spent time socializing with his new colleagues, they finally gave him his first assignment. Alex's first task was to test a game called China Palace, which was still in its early development stages, by a small, lesser-known company called Golden Lion Games. The game was described as an adventure puzzle-style game about a player needing to find some of the important items and to solve puzzles to escape a large Chinese restaurant that they accidentally locked in at night. Before a timer runs out, Alex was curious about the details of the game and eagerly went to work on one of the quieter rooms to test out the game straight away. As soon as Alex got onto his computer, he found the email where the download link was, and he booted up the game. He was immediately drawn into its retro 2000s style. However, he saw due to the hardware issues and some of the 3D objects and textures weren't re-rendered properly, making the game slightly look outdated and clunky. There were also some elements in the game that felt like it was a bit too odd for Alex. For starters, he had no main menu when he opened the game, and there was a few elements in the restaurant setting in the game that looked slightly more obnoxious than Alex had expected, such as the dim lighting of the restaurant and a slow bell chime sounded like a Chinese gong was playing in the background within a 20-minute timer on the top left corner of the screen. There was also some Chinese-themed decorations scattered around the restaurant and looked historical and ancient, such as statues and lanterns. Despite this, Alex pressed on, happy to see the test the game to its fullest potential. He didn't really care about most of the glitchy and unfinished stuff in the game, knowing that the developers of it would do something to fix it. It was still in development after all. As he went further into the game, Alex noticed some few more things in the game that caught his attention. They didn't seem odd to Alex at first, but this would soon change as they continued playing. There was some cute cartoony-looking characters that started following him around slowly with a neutral but slightly stern expressions on their faces. Alex didn't think much of them at first, assuming that they were just part of the quirky addition to the game's atmosphere. However, as they became slightly more persistent, he slowly began to feel a little oddity sense of uneasiness about them, as if there were something sinister about them. There were 2D assets in the game, and those turned expressions frozen on their faces, while they followed the player around slowly. It wasn't until later that Alex discovered that the cartoony-looking goat characters' designs weren't actually for the original designs made for the game, but taken from a cartoon that had been popular in China for many years. This revelation made Alex feel a little bit more curious about the game's development process. It was clear that the developers had cut corners and taken shortcuts in the game's design. Despite this, Alex continued playing, as a mixture of feelings grew more complex with each passing moment of the game's atmosphere. He also found it a bit funny that the designs for the goats were already taken from something that was Chinese, considering the setting was literally a Chinese restaurant. Alex was definitely no stranger to the horror material in most games. He had some experiences playing and looking into some horror games during his childhood before he graduated from high school and got his job as a test player. Some he was comfortable playing, such as zombie survival games, and some of the usually ones stayed away from, the material that might be a little too over the top of his age at the time. Even so, he felt like the game China Place was a bit of a tough nut to crack, despite not having anything like any blood or gore anywhere else in the game so far. The glitchy style of the game's 3D assets, the low quality of some of the textures and sound effects, and its retro 2000s style was enough to make him feel a little uneasy, but was somewhat intrigued at the same time. Despite this slightly uneasy feelings about what he had seen in the game so far, Alex's curiosity got the better of him, and he wanted to experience something he had in the game had to offer. So he tried his best to find and solve all the essential items, slightly tricky puzzles, by looking in the cupboards, kitchens, secret paths, and basements in the restaurant, while the eerie sound came and continued to play slowly in the background as the timer trickled down. Unfortunately, Alex was failed to complete the game in time. The timer had reached 0, and the sound of the gong stopped, and it was at this point where Alex knew he would soon discover the mimic of the timer. Although he expected something simple, just like a simple game over scream, some of the loud Chinese bells started playing. A loud, distorted, digitalized, blood-curdling screams almost sounded as if they were like the sounds of goats bleeding mixed in. Abruptly started blaring out of the computer speakers, and this startled Alex a little. He wasn't expecting some sort of all of a sudden compressed, ear-shattering bells and screams. He also saw the cartoon face of the goats no longer had their calmer, neutral, stern expressions on their faces. Instead, they had angry and menacing ones with gritted teeth instead. What made them a bit more menacing was that, while the designs of the goats still had their cartoony look to them, they also looked more realistic details mixed in, such as complex shading, limb details. It's almost as if the whole design was all added just for them one moment in the game. And while it didn't look like scary enough, it was enough to make Alex's skin crawl a little, with loud noises playing in the background. The goats slowly began to pick up speed as they chose to chase the player around the restaurant. Alex, in this state of both uneasiness and confusion, tried to find its way to complete the game while trying to escape from the goats' wrath, while the screams grew louder and louder as they came closer to the player. And as Alex continued to listen to the loud banshee-like scream noises, accompanied by the loud bells that would ring in his head for days after he played the game, he felt as if it was pure hell, giving him goosebumps as well as a sense of dread that ran through his body. But what it made a little more worse for Alex was that when he was the only person in the room experiencing all of this all the time, he worried that no one else would believe him if he told someone about the game. But at the same time, he was kind of thankful that no one near them at the time to yell at him for anything. Eventually, the goat characters, he managed to catch up to Alex, and the game froze then for about 3 seconds. Then the computer screen cut to black, but with nothing, with an eerie silence. Alex just sat there in his chair, frozen after what he had seen. At this point, he had a mixture of emotions such as confusion, surprise, uneasiness, and curiosity. It didn't take long for the game over screen to pop up on his screen. Alex saw was a black and white picture of what seemed to be like a real-face building that was a major fire, with the angry face cartoon goat characters faded into burned into the picture, along with the words "Game Over" was written at the bottom of the picture. It was unsettling for Alex, but not too disturbing or frightening. The game then shut down automatically, and the computer screen showed the desktop once again. Alex was sitting in his chair. He was too scared to even buy the things that he had just seen in the game. There wasn't any blood or graphic imagery that was too much for him. But he had a feeling that something just wasn't right, and he soon began to ask himself questions. What happens at the end if you manage to complete and escape the restaurant? That was intended for audiences and the age group of the game. Did the developers really want to make it sinister? Were there any other elements of the game was based off or inspired by real-life events? Were stuff like the ghost designs and screeching noises placeholders? Were any of the things down in the game that was supposed to represent something that he didn't know about? At that moment, another colleague named James somehow managed to hear the faint noises that were coming from the room where Alex was in, and he came into the room, where he saw him sitting in his chair. Luckily, he wasn't mad at him and just wanted to show if everything was alright. He saw Alex's slightly surprised, uneasy face, and asked him if he was okay. Alex just got up and began to walk to the office where his managers were, with James escorting him. Alex and James walked into the manager's office, and the manager with the office, noticing Alex's slightly concerned face, and told him to come and have a sit down and talk. Alex began telling him what he experienced when he had played earlier, hoping for an explanation or some kind of reassurance. The manager simply just brushed it off and told him it was probably best for him to take a short break. Alex sat in the office for a while with a cup of coffee, and James was also there, sitting with Alex and comforting him, telling him that the glitches and oddities would be sorted out soon by the developers. Alex knew that James may or may not be right, but he still couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the game that he had planned and played earlier, but he didn't want to push the further issue. Eventually, a few people in the workplace, including James, began looking into the China Palace game, and soon of them began feeling the same way Alex did when he tested the game. Some saw the potential of the game's use's obnoxious atmosphere, and the thought of it brought the game features that would at least be fixed or toned down, such as some of the sound effects, such as some hardware problems, although it was unknown if any of them tried to complete the whole game without the timer running out. They were considered as an aspect of the game that was extremely difficult to beat. The manager found the email containing the link for the game, hoping to find out what Golden Lion game developers were intended for the China Place game to be. So he sent a few emails to the account and sent the original email, but however he never received a response. This only fueled the suspicion further, and he decided to do some online research on the company and that they developed for the game. But not much was found, except for a small website that showcased other games that the company had developed. Most of them were still in development. China Place was surprisingly also included on the list, but there wasn't really much information about the game itself. Despite some of this interesting concepts and potential possible that could have drawn a few people's attention, China Place was never fully completed, improved, or released for anyone to see and play. Many people tried to get in contact with the developers behind the game and asked them what their intentions were, but to no avail. Many assumed that it's the game and the companies they were most likely some sort of prank made by someone who had nothing better to do, which may play the possibility explain why the supposed company wasn't responding to the manager's email. Eventually, the email that had the game's files and link was eventually discarded, making the entire China Place game a piece of lost media. Years later, Alex still continued on with his job at the same workplace as a test player, and also helping in development with some games. Over the years, he had gained some new friends there, and he would like to talk to hang out with often, including James, who had become one of his closest friends. He was still an edgier worker and was respected by most of his friends, as well as the people in charge of the workplace. And if he knew any sort of feeling or stress and comfort, he would come to one of his friends or managers to help solve the issue. Despite Alex living a better life at his job, making new friends along the way, you couldn't just help but feel a little bit more curious about the China Place game that he had all those years ago. Oh, the memory of the cartoon characters with their angry expressions and pretty much the slightly unsettling appearance of the game over screen, it still lingered in his mind. He often wondered what it could have happened if he had the game been released to the public for people to play, and if anyone had managed to save the link for the game and managed to play the whole thing to get to the end of it. Alex wondered what if someday that game would some sort of be an urban legend to the gaming community. But considering the game's obscurity as well as a short-lived resistance, he pretty much personally doubts it would be. Over the years after playing the game, Alex would still sometimes be at the dream of the vague images of the night about it, of a dimly lit Chinese restaurant with some cartoon characters to get stern faces. You couldn't see them clearly, like as if something was blurry, but all you could really do sometimes were being muffled screams, noises of a Chinese bell ringing, and screaming in the distance. Feeling like there was no one present close to him, but he, would sometimes wake up at night and keep telling to himself that it was all just a dream. But as he lay there in bed, staring up at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the game. Something that just was glitchy with textures and creepy cartoon goat faces, and he knew that memories like these would stay with him for quite a while.